Hey everyone, think we're live now. Connection's coming through nice and strong. Thanks a lot for joining us. I'll be with you in just a few moments and we'll get cracking. Lots to get through tonight, lots to talk about. Thanks a lot for joining us on our regular Sunday night My Left Eye live stream. Just while waiting for people to arrive, we're going to drop into the fondue lounge, as always, with Keith and his pals. And then I'll just quickly talk through what we're going to be going through in the show. And yeah, feel free to drop us a message in the chat as well. It's great to have you all here tonight. Hope you're all having a great day. Happy Sunday. Happy Mothering Sunday as well. Shout out to the sisters today. This one goes out to all the mothers. Let's dip across to the lounge now just while people arrive. Okay, I'll just wait for the room to fill up a little bit and then we'll get cracking. There is a lot to get through today, as I said. But it's great to see you all here this evening. Hope you're well. Obviously, the Gaza protests have been continuing, despite Sunak's attempt to clamp down on protests and label the people attending them as extremists. There's been a great response from that over the weekend. We're going to take a look at some of the sights from some of the protests, some of the speeches as well. It's been great to see everybody joining in solidarity with support for a ceasefire in Gaza. We're also going to see what the Tories and Labour have been up to over the last week. Rachel Reeves has got a few things to answer for, that's for sure. We'll be dipping into her party shortly. And whether you're a new follower of the channel or you've been with us for a while, you're all very welcome here tonight. Just a quick reminder, if you're going to post in the chat, please do keep it nice and cordial and polite. Don't have any moderators at the moment, so I will do my best to manage the chat while we go through the videos as well. But if you've got a particularly pertinent point or a question or a message that you'd like read out, please do use our super chats as well. That's a great way to support the channel. Also, we've got the membership partnership scheme open at the moment. If you'd like to consider joining us, we've got a couple of great packages, including one designed just for people who enjoy live streams, and they're available from just 99p a month with some fantastic perks. So hit the join button and you can find out what kind of perks we've got. We've got static emojis and that kind of thing. All support's greatly appreciated there. Also, if you'd like to gift memberships to other people in the chat, that's a great way to help support the channel, as well as our super thanks and super stickers. So please do consider becoming a member of the channel. It's great to see our community growing. We did our 1k subscribers special live stream last week. Fantastic to reach that milestone. At the moment we're just over 2.1 thousand subscribers, which is fantastic. Been absolutely blown away by the response to our recent content, so thanks very much as well for that. Also, thanks for your comments as well, all of the comments that we've had on our videos recently. We've had one or two trolls, but the vast majority have had great contributions to make in the chat as well. So we'll be getting started shortly, just waiting for the room to fill up a bit more. Bird's Nest Fat Rest, how are you doing tonight? And Odin Allfathers joined us in the chat as well. Hope you're well this evening. Bird's Nest Rockfest says everyone seems all political parties are the same. Yeah, that's true. Certainly for the establishment parties at the moment, but hopefully things could be changing. Obviously George Galloway's caused a stir recently with the Workers' Party of Britain. We have done a couple of videos about that recently as well. They could be one of the parties to keep an eye on in the upcoming general election, as well as other grassroots parties and independent candidates. We might get a few surprises. People certainly are sick of the mainstream establishment parties, as it were. Perhaps the winds of change are starting to slowly blow. We'll find out as soon as Sunak decides to call the election, which he hasn't done yet. That'll be a lot more convenient for me to work around videos that I'll be doing coming up to the general election. Obviously, we're going to be covering that, as well as a lot of other stuff. And Odin Allfather, cordial is a concentrate. Not sure, is that the drink cordial? Drink from concentrate is, of course, needs watering down. Don't drink it whole. Thanks a lot for joining us. Thanks a lot for your comments as well. Yeah, and so much happening with regards to aid in Gaza. The US have set up this port. However, it could be too little too late. There also could be nefarious means attached to that, including extraction of resources from Palestine for natural resources, oil and gas. There's tons, there's billions and billions and billions of dollars worth there. A lot of people think that this could be a sort of smokescreen or shield to hide the fact that that's why they're setting up this port in Gaza. We're going to be talking about that as well. Also the proposed George Galloway, Jeremy Corbyn pact. In fact, I'll start off just by saying a few words about that very quickly. Unfortunately, I did have my reservations about this. I didn't think it was quite likely for them to come together and form an alliance. It's transpired. Corbyn has responded and said it's pretty much a non-starter, unfortunately. They do obviously agree on the issue in Gaza, but outside of that there are a lot of topics that they have different views on. I can't say I'm surprised. Okay. Just bear with me one sec, just once more with Keith, and then we'll get cracking. Yeah, as I was saying, I'm not surprised that Corbyn's politely refused the offer from George Galloway. There's a few topics that they do disagree on. Environment and climate change, for example. I know that they're worlds apart on that, as well as the stance on Brexit, of course, and other issues. Where it comes to standing up to war, they're very much aligned. In fact, they were both on the stage at the massive protests against Iraq back in the day, with the million-person march through London, and they both did give fantastic speeches. They're both great orators, but they're not going to be coming together, unfortunately. But as we've mentioned recently on the channel, something that does have to happen is grassroots parties and socialist independents forming some sort of pact, whether it's to make sure that there's only one candidate in each constituency, for example. That could help, and then everybody can get behind the same thing and avoid splitting the vote just to challenge the Tories, Labour, Lib Dem, the established right-wing, neoliberal or far-right parties as they were. Obviously not a great deal of love for the Reform Party, although they are a small party. I think they're getting a lot more attention than they deserve, frankly. And as I've mentioned before, I think the Greens could make a couple of surprise gains at the general election. We pointed out that recent poll in Bristol that showed the Greens way ahead of Labour in that, but I always take polls with a pinch of salt unless it's an exit poll. Of course, they tend to be quite accurate, but we'll have to see what happens. We're going to dive in first with a quick look at a great comeback in the Houses of Commons, in the House of Commons even, with Jeremy Corbyn. We'll take a quick look at that before we get on to the other clips. So you might have already seen this. It's not a very long clip. Tory was stood up in Parliament and trying to make out that the country dodged a bullet by not electing Jeremy Corbyn, and tried to say how different the country would be, and Corbyn's comeback to this was absolutely spot on. So let's quickly take a look at that before we dive into the clips. I've got quite a bit to get through. I'll be honest, it's been difficult to sort of decide which order to do things, but we'll try and plough through. And if you've got anything that you'd like to talk about, please do drop us a message in the chat or use our super chats as well. We do have the chat set to subscribers only at the moment. If you're a new follower of the channel, please just hit the subscribe button. 60 seconds later, you'll be able to join everyone else in the chat. Good evening, Jack Picard. Hope you're doing well tonight. Thanks a lot for that greeting message there. Hope you're well. Right, let's take a look at this great comeback from Jeremy Corbyn. Not now, Keith. We've got things to do. We'll be joining Keith later. And we'll quickly bob in and see how Rachel's doing. No, still terrible. Still terrible.
Don't say it's been 14 wasted years. That's an insult to the British people. It's been challenging, absolutely, and not without frustration. I can say that firsthand. But had Labour been in office, without benefit of hindsight, would they have fared so much better than us? Bearing in mind, it actually would have been, and he's in his place, the Honourable Member for Islington would have been at the helm for some time. He certainly would have taken Britain in a very different direction. I think he would acknowledge that. But here is the rub. It's not like I did mention him, so I will give way.
I thank the member for giving way. Yes, it would have been a very different direction, and there wouldn't be the levels of poverty, homelessness and inequality that there are in this country today.
Absolutely, well said. In fact, shortly before the 2019 election, Jeremy Corbyn said his very first policy, the very first thing he would announce as Prime Minister if he was elected, would be to eradicate homelessness in Britain. And if you can imagine, if we'd have had Corbyn for the last 5 years instead of the Tories, we'd be 5 years into the Green New Deal. We'd have a lot more renewable energy, a lot more green jobs. We'd probably have a £15 an hour minimum wage. At the moment, the Tories are outdoing the Labour Party on issues such as minimum wage and pay. The budget, obviously, the mini budget with Jeremy what's he called? Sorry, it's in my notes. Hunt was more or less half made out of stolen Labour policies anyway, if you want a further reminder of how closely aligned the Tories and Labour are at the moment. But we'd probably have nationalised energy, rail and mail as well under a Corbyn government. So he's absolutely right, yeah. The country would be in a completely different state, but a state for the better, not the absolute dumpster fire that we've got at the moment with the Tories, that's for sure. And things could have been so much differently if Starmer and others hadn't stabbed the great man Jeremy Corbyn in the back. We wouldn't have had to put up with another 5 years of Tories. So if Labour do get in at the next general election, things aren't going to change. We're all well aware of that. I'm sure that our viewers and listeners are as well. Yeah, but that's just where we are. That's just where we are. So that was a good comeback at least. And still people are trying to stick the knives into Corbyn as though all of the things that were said about him haven't been long debunked. The anti-Semitism scam, for example, which we talk about quite often on the channel as well. But for a quick roundup of where the Tories have left us, the state that the Tories have left us, I've got another clip lined up here, and this comes from Led by Donkeys, who I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. You will have seen their videos before, but this latest release from them just basically sums up how the Tories are akin to the mob and how they are a mob in themselves. Yeah, Wolfpet, thanks a lot for that comment. No flying around the country in private jets at taxpayers' expense if Jeremy Corbyn had got into number 10. He was, of course, lowest on the list of expenses when the whole expenses scandal was going on. You'll no doubt remember that other MPs had ridiculous things that they'd used taxpayers' money to pay for. Toilet seats, a moat built around their home. Someone put a chocolate bar, on their expenses. These kind of things. Jeremy Corbyn was flat bottom, and you'll no doubt remember the footage of him on a crowded train, choosing to take a seat and not complain, not use his status to benefit himself. He truly is a humble gentleman and a genuine socialist, and I won't hear anything different about him. Those in the media, those on the right wing, will obviously try and paint a completely different picture, but as usual, they try and talk to people like we just came down with the last drop of rain. But we do, of course, know the truth. This is a great summary from Led by Donkeys. If you've not seen this already, then do check this out as well.
Good morning, Britain. We're descending into mob rule. That's according to the Prime Minister, who's demanding police get tough on intimidating protesters in order to protect politicians and democracy.
In recent weeks and months, we have seen a shocking increase in extremist disruption and criminality.
Because you've made protesting against the law, probably, Rishi?
What started as protests on our street has descended into intimidation, threats, and planned acts of violence.
So intimidation and threats, sorry, I won't cut in too much on this clip. Obviously, when Sunak's speaking, it really does get my hackles up. But the intimidation and threats I just want to quickly address. I can't remember exactly which MP it was, but they said that the constituency office had been stormed by protesters and acted as though there was a violent pitchfork and fire torch wielding mob outside, when the actual footage and pictures revealed it was around 8 to 10 peaceful protesters who stood in the office with placards, perhaps at a low level, chanting as well. But the way that it was put to people as though that the office had been stormed and that threats had been made, there haven't been any threats. The only thing that the Tories feel threatened by is any chance of any real democracy coming into this country. That's where they feel threatened. But when you use the word threat, obviously that has connotations of perhaps violent threats, this kind of thing, and that's far from the truth. That's far from the truth. These Tories, they just can't take people using their right to protest, and that's what they want to strip away from us. So it's utterly pathetic nonsense as usual from Sunak there. Okay, I'll let the clip play through a bit more and won't interrupt as much. I just want to quickly point out, you might have noticed our new feature on the top right corner of your screen. I've set a membership goal for the stream of 5. If we could get 5 new members joining on the channel, that'd be amazing. There's a great number of perks if you want to check out our packages as well. So if we can get through to 5 new memberships by the end of the stream, that'd be great. And I will, of course, be keeping score as we go through. And that's just to explain what that is in the top right corner. Sure, should have pointed that out at the top of the show. Sorry about that. Let's crack on with Led by Donkeys.
The Conservative Party is busy claiming Britain is in the grip of mob rule because hundreds of thousands of people have taken to the streets to protest against the war in Gaza.
There's only one way to describe those marches. They are hate marches.
It's a ridiculous claim, of course. Arrests per person on the Palestine marches have been lower than at the Glastonbury Festival. In reality, there have been multiple times when it's been the Conservative Party backing the mob. For a start, there was the period when hundreds of thousands of pro-Hunt protesters regularly marched in London and other cities. Some of them carried deeply offensive homophobic placards. These marchers declared they simply would not accept a new law, even if it was passed by Parliament. Police feared the protests could turn violent, and they were right.
From the countryside!
The main entrance to Parliament had to be closed after hundreds of pro-hunting supporters attempted to storm the Palace of Westminster. On a different occasion, Parliament was suspended after 5 protesters burst into the Commons chamber. That same day, 29 Hunt supporters were arrested when a Countryside Alliance protest turned into a riot in Parliament Square, in which dozens of police officers were injured. Some of the mob even threw empty shotgun cartridges at the police.
This war now is a civil war!
10 days later, 100 pro-Hunt protesters, some from the Countryside Alliance, barricaded a Labour government minister's home while he was inside with his family. And what did the Conservative Party think about all this? What about the Daily Telegraph? Did they disavow the hunting lobby? Did they tell them to stop their marches? No. They continued to back them to the hilt.
And of course, that sums it up. This hatred that comes from the right is all well and good with the mainstream media. People who want to go out and slaughter innocent animals. It's all fair game for them. But as soon as any of the left wing, as soon as there's any socialist protest, they turn on everything, and it's just ridiculous rhetoric altogether.
Telegraph even ran fawning articles about one of the men who stormed the Commons.
Never was there any sign saying no publicly on this point.
The chief executive of the Countryside Alliance, when the group organised that Parliament Square protest that turned violent, was Simon Hart. When Mr. Hart was chief executive designate of the group, the Alliance created a full-time unit that was given the task of organising what it called the Hounding of Ministers, a campaign of public harassment of anti-Hunt MPs. So, what's Mr. Hart doing now? He's Rishi Sunak's chief whip. And do you remember when petrol protesters brought Britain to a standstill? They issued an ultimatum to the Labour government giving ministers 60 days to change policy or the protests would escalate. At that point, the blockades of oil refineries had led to a 40% reduction in traffic on Britain's motorways. The leader of the mob was Brindley Williams.
We will finish this right to the end.
So how did the Conservative Party treat Brindley Williams, the man behind what was undoubtedly mob rule? Well, they gave him a seat in the Welsh Assembly, then made him their spokesman for environmental affairs. This is what David Cameron said about him when he died.
Perhaps I could just add a word about Brindley Williams, because he was a giant of a man.
And do you remember when Nigel Farage stoked racial hatred with his Breaking Point poster? The day he unveiled it, MP Joe Cox was murdered by a right-wing terrorist. Indeed, the atmosphere stoked by Farage and by leading Conservative Party Brexiters became very dangerous as they cried betrayal. Here we are again in Parliament Square. But Farage was still invited to Tory conference last year where he danced with former cabinet ministers. Then there was a time Sir Ian Duncan Smith, the previous leader of the Conservative Party, backed the vandals who were violently attacking cameras installed to enforce pollution-reducing measures in London. Arguing in support of criminal damage, Sir Ian said, "A lot of people in my constituency have been cementing up the cameras or putting plastic bags over them. I am happy for them to do it, because they're facing an imposition that no one wants and they've been lied to about it." The clean air measures were introduced by the Mayor of London, who'd been voted in for a second term. And who could forget the appalling scenes at the Cenotaph last night?
I find that one particularly incredible. Obviously, hunters, absolute pieces of crap, pardon my language. But, yeah, the fact that people don't even want clean air to breathe, especially in inner city areas such as London, and that they go out to protest for their right to choke on toxic fumes. And I've had personal conversations with friends of mine who work in the NHS in London who have treated children who are dying from lung and respiratory conditions caused by inner city pollution. And people on the right are going out for the right to die, the right to breathe in dirty air. It beggars belief. It beggars belief. And obviously this mob at the Cenotaph last November, like we're just about to see here now, the trouble, the real mob, is always on the right. That's where the extremists are. That's where the racism is. It is always from the right. It is always of the right, never of the left, despite how the Tories and the mainstream media would like to try and paint it. But when you Stephen Yaxley Lennon's, aka Tommy Robinson's, etc., show up trying to stoke hatred and they're just looking for a fight, these are the real thugs. This is the real mob. Not peaceful protesters who are just calling for a ceasefire and an end to a genocide.
November on Armistice Day, when far-right extremists broke through police lines and then ran amok in central London for several hours. Their actions followed days of incendiary rhetoric from Rishi Sunak's Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, about the Palestine Peace March of the same day. 92 far-right extremists were arrested on the day. By 5 p.m, just 5 of the several 100,000 pro-Palestine marchers had been arrested. Former Conservative Prime Minister Liz Truss sat on a platform with far-right extremist Steve Bannon when the leader of the Cenotaph rioters, Tommy Robinson, was described as a hero.
Speaking of endorsements from Steve Bannon, we are going to take a look further into the stream about his recent supportive comments around Keir Starmer, of course. And if you're getting compliments from a far-right loon such as Steve Bannon, who thinks that you're okay, then I think that absolutely, obviously speaks volumes for your politics. Same, of course, applies to Liz Truss, but she didn't even outlast a lettuce in her premiership. We'll be talking a little bit more about that later on.
She didn't challenge Bannon. Truss now supports Donald Trump's bid to return to the presidency, as do Jacob Rees-Mogg, Boris Johnson and numerous other leading Conservatives. Trump, of course, sparked a mob to storm the US Capitol and try to overturn an election. 5 people died as a result of that riot, one of them a police officer. And last but not least, let's not forget the Prime Minister himself, no stranger to criticising climate protesters for slowing down traffic. Last month, Rishi Sunak attended a road-blocking farmers' protest in Wales. Turns out, it's fine to block a road if you're opposing changes designed to protect the environment.
Yeah, of course. Referring to the Just Stop Oil protests, which have been very prominent over the last couple of years. It turns out, unsurprisingly, that Sunak and his family, in terms of business, will be financially benefiting from the new oil and gas licences, perhaps to the tune of over £1 billion as well, which is a huge amount of money, and that's just a classic case of nepotism and corruption within the Tory government. So he's okay with people blocking roads for one cause, but not for a different cause that would obviously go against his personal financial interests. Of course, what an absolute hypocrite, what an absolute piece of you-know.
So when these people urge peaceful protesters to stop marching, remember where they stood when there really was a threat from mob rule.
So that's led by donkeys there, of course. Do follow their stuff as well. Brilliant content, as always. And that just really nails it on the head, the whole attitude towards protest that we're getting from the Tory party at the moment. Sunak's speech in front of Number 10 the other week was, of course, completely ridiculous, and he's been rightly condemned for his statements. But people showed out in force over the weekend to defy that statement and continue to protest and support a ceasefire in Gaza. But of course, at the moment, unfortunately, Labour are no better than the Tories. In fact, we can go across to Keir Starmer now and just quickly get his opinion on current Tory policy. What do you say, Keith?
Under my leadership, we will engage constructively with the government. Not opposition for opposition's sake, not scoring party political points or making impossible demands, but with the courage to support where that's the right thing to do.
Yep, the Starmer bot, as always, back in the government, copying Tory policies. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of the budget was actually pilfered from Labour policy and has now been used by Jeremy Hunt in the budget. And Labour are telling us that they're going to be the party of change, apparently, although even by their own admission, which I'm about to show you from an article today, as we all know, they're not going to be any different from the Tories. They're not going to bring us any positive change, that's for sure. If anything, things will stay the same or get worse, but we'll just quickly take a look at this article from Rachel Reeves. Quickly pop in and see how she's doing as well. No, party still hasn't kicked off there. She's still holding John Hurt captive at this party. I think we might have to set up a crowdfunder or something. We'll see what we can do to get him out of there. Just quickly check out the article. Bear with me one sec. Yeah, just line this up. Bear with me a moment. So she admits that Labour won't be turning things round immediately. I say they won't be turning anything round at all as we quickly take a look through this article. Let's just have a quick listen to the video, actually. and see what she's got to say for herself.
It is clear that the inheritance that a Labour government would have if we do win the next election will be the worst since the Second World War. And I have to be honest that we're not going to be able to turn things around straight away, but we will get to work on all of that. And I have announced, Laura, an initial injection of cash into our struggling public services. There's the commitments around reducing NHS waiting lists and breakfast clubs at primary schools.
Which at the moment you can't tell us how you spend for, but just
we will fund those pledges. But also, Laura, beyond that, we have said that we would extend the windfall tax on the big profits the energy giants are making, and we would invest that money in moving to the low carbon.
Just want to quickly pause there. We all know that it's nationalisation that's needed, not a windfall tax every now and then. It's got to be permanent, something permanent that puts the profits back into the public economy, back into the country's economy. So if she's just going to sprinkle a few windfall taxes here and there, that's really not going to do the job. She's recently used the magic money tree analogy herself, which is obviously awful, as well as the credit card analogy for public borrowing, as if she doesn't know that the Bank of England exists. That is the magic money tree. We can borrow it from ourselves, the Bank of England. It's called public investment, Rachel. This is someone who's supposed to be an expert on economics, but pretends not to even know that, which is, of course, ludicrous. So she keeps saying that things are going to happen. She isn't going to say where the money's going to come from, but obviously that's because she's not going to be taking it from the top earners. She's not going to be nationalising public services. It's ordinary working people who are going to suffer the same as they are under the Tories. And she knows that. She's just a poor Thatcher imitation tribute act. We all know that. She thinks that we're stupid. She thinks the general public are thick as a post and that we will just absorb everything that she says. But with this woman in charge of public finance, believe me, we are definitely not going to be turning this country around. We're going to be going down the same dark and dire path that we have been for the last 15 years. And she's just going to continue that.
Industries of the future. VAT and business rates on private schools and putting that money into the 93% of children at state schools.
But we're asking
probably taxing the private equity bosses to put more money into our public services.
Yeah, pathetic response. There, let's just point out a few things from this article. Obviously, she's on the Laura Kussenberg show there. The Shadow Chancellor did not rule out making cuts in some areas, saying Labour would inherit the worst economy since World War II. But immediately after World War II, Rachel, we managed to create the NHS, which is obviously one of the finest institutions that this country has, or perhaps across the entire world. And it was done socially, and at a time when the country was near bankrupt, having come out of a very, very, very expensive world war, which isn't a situation that we're in at the moment. She's got no excuse. It is just the lack of political will and a political choice not to invest. She said she would be methodically identifying ways to pay for existing pledges on the NHS and schools. You know what that means. It means an increase on tax for lower earners. It means that the people in charge of private business, the top 1%, are going to be getting wealthier. That wealth gap is going to increase under Labour, just as it's doing under the Tories. The Conservatives said Labour didn't have a plan to pay for their policies. I guess technically that's correct. That's a rarity there, an actual true statement being put out by the Conservatives, but the Labour Party just keep giving them a stick to beat them with. The interview, it says, came a few days after Chancellor Jeremy Hunt set out the government's tax and spending plans in his budget, including a cut to national insurance and an expansion of child benefit. Of course, he did include delaying an increase in taxes on fossil fuel companies as well. I'm sure that's something that Rachel Reeves could get behind. And Now the Tories want to cut out national insurance altogether, which is of course completely ludicrous and a completely bonkers idea. That's going to cost several £billions annually, which leaves even less money to reinvest with. And, you know, I wouldn't mind paying a little bit more in national insurance if it meant that we had a better society, if that money was being put into public services. But no, it still continues to end up in private hands, of course, as everything gets sold off as it has done over the last 30 years. Everything must go, of course. Ordinal Father says, Sir is depending on disaffected Tories. And that's true. That's true. And if Tory voters would consider moving over to Labour, as a lot of MPs already have, and vice versa, look at your Lee Andersons, John Bercow, former Speaker of the House, has moved over to Labour from the Tory party. They're that close. There's nothing between them. You can't put a razor blade between them. You can't put a cigarette paper between them. Whatever analogy you'd like to use, that is just the case. It's just Tories in red rosettes as far as Labour's concerned. Those are the facts. Points out that Labour had previously said it would use the £2 billion it expected to raise from these changes to pay for improvements in the NHS and breakfast clubs in schools. I would not say that the NHS would be safer in Wes Streeting's hands than it is in the Tories' hands. What was the analogy that John Major used a while back? It would be worse than leaving a mouse with a hungry python. I think I might be paraphrasing there, but that still counts. That's still valid. So they say they will do that in an orderly way. You know, it's always boardroom business, Tory kind of language that you're hearing from Labour these days. She also pointed to the party's plans to tax private equity executives and introduce VAT and business rates in private schools. We've heard this before. Even Tony Blair was going on about this kind of thing. He never followed through on that. The same way that he spoke about abolishing the House of Lords and other things that just never came into fruition. Ms Reeves confirmed Labour would keep the government's cuts to high rate of capital gains tax on the sale of second homes announced by Mr Hunt, saying the Office for Budget Responsibility calculated that it would bring in revenue. A general election is expected to take place later this year, and with the party leading in the opinion polls, Labour's tax and spending plans are coming under increasing scrutiny. Also points out the head of the IFS, Paul Johnson, says unprotected departments could see day-to-day cuts of 20 billion. Asked if Labour would have to implement real terms cuts in some areas, Ms Reeves said she was under no illusions, adding it's clear that the inheritance of a Labour government would have, if we do win the election, will be the worst since the Second World War. That's a pathetic excuse. She might think that that'll wash with the public, but that's no excuse at all. I suppose they're planning on leaving a note. The Tories will be leaving a note on the desk, as happened in 2010, saying that there's no money left. But the Bank of England is a thing. Do we have to remind Rachel Reeves? She said that Labour would boost growth through its £7.3 billion investment in a national wealth fund aimed at increasing private investment in the zero carbon economy. Well, obviously that's a load of crap as well. They've thrown the £28 billion Green Pledge out the window. Obviously, to turn things around and seriously reduce our carbon output, it would take more than a £28 billion investment. This would also help to save working families so much money that are currently burdened by fossil fuel bills, high energy bills, people struggling and choosing between heating and eating. But we're not going to get a Green New Deal with Labour. Also, I won't get into the difference between net zero and actual zero. I don't actually support the concept of net zero. You might be wondering why I'm saying that. I'm obviously environmentally conscious, of course. The thing with net zero that's important to point out is the word net. And there are these things called carbon credits. Not sure if you're familiar with this. Essentially, it allows countries to appear on paper as though they haven't put out as many emissions as they have by offsetting carbon credits and things like this. I won't go into all of the technical details. If you do want a thorough explanation of that, I suggest you check out the work of other people such as Professor Kevin Anderson, who's a former government and UN advisor on climate change. He comprehensively explains how countries will be able to appear that they're not putting out as much carbon as they are, and be able to sort of kick the can down the road and blame other countries. So you do have to look out for the terminology with these things, especially. So one little word such as net completely changes the entire situation. We need to have, you know, actual zero emissions or negative emissions if possible. Just quickly go through a couple more bits on this article before we move on. Got quite a bit to get through today, so yeah, I will crack through. The Shadow Chancellor also said a party's workers' rights package, which includes giving workers full employment rights from day one, was pro-business and pro-worker and would be in Labour's manifesto. I mentioned earlier that the Tories are currently in front of Labour in terms of things such as minimum wage. Labour don't even want to back nurses for £15 an hour, let alone that being the general minimum wage. Things aren't going to be better for ordinary workers under Labour any more than they are the Tory party. Responding to Ms Reeves' interview, Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Laura Trott, said that Labour were unable to say how they would pay for their unfunded spending commitments. That's because they don't have a plan to pay for it. That means higher taxes taking us back to square one. Of course, in the run-up to the 2019 general election, people accused Jeremy Corbyn of coming up with a magic money tree and all of these kind of accusations. The manifesto itself was completely costed, and they explained how every policy would be funded. And the difference between Labour this time around and Labour under Jeremy Corbyn is, of course, the money would have come from the people at the top. But under Reeves, under Starmer's Labour, it's just going to be ordinary people who are suffering, whilst private businesses and the wealthy top 1% laugh their way to the bank as usual. So, by their own admission, despite the amount of times we've heard Keir Starmer in public speeches, in social media videos, this kind of thing, using the word change, Rachel Reeves has spelled out clearly there that Labour won't be able to turn things around immediately. Which begs the question, apart from the party name being Labour, why would anyone even consider voting for them at all? What people have to do is imagine that Labour aren't called Labour. Imagine that it's a brand new party that have come along. They're saying the things that they're saying. They have the policies that they have. People wouldn't even give them a second look. It is only through the party name, Labour, that they're somehow trying to appear as actual alternatives to the Conservatives. But we all know that's not the case. Yes, Odin Allfather, you're quite right there. The Robin Hood tax, we need that. And then, of course, the right-wingers, mainstream media will come out and say, oh, but that'll put rich people and businesses off coming to this country. Good riddance to them. If they're not paying the people properly, if they're not paying the right amount of tax, and I'm talking about the likes of Amazon here, of course, these kind of companies who get away with record profits every year and don't, on a lot of occasions, even pay a single penny in tax. You and I, on this stream tonight, ordinary workers who are out there in the day-to-day, you pay more income tax than Amazon, who are worth billions upon billions of pounds. In fact, isn't it estimated at the moment that, well, they're not sure if it'll be Amazon or Tesla, but could potentially be the first $1 trillion company, blue chip stock on the market. And that's just appalling. It's just appalling. And we need to put a stop to it. Rachel bloody Reeves, eh? There she is with her friend Ratchet. Of course, someone was asking on a live stream recently if she'd managed to bump into Ratchet. Just want to give a quick shout out as well to the Agitator who's provided these pictures. I can't take the credit for that. He's a great parody account on Twitter, on social media. Give him a follow at the Agitator if you've not done so. already. And before we move on, just a quick plug or two. Just want to do a quick bit of shilling before we move on. So we've got our membership goal set at 5 for the stream tonight. If we can get 5 new members to join the channel and enjoy our perks, that'd be fantastic. We've got the counter going there. We'll of course add to that as we go through the channel. We've got super chats, super thanks and super stickers open. I do promise hand on heart to read out all the super chat messages, whether it's a point or a question, or you just want to say hello. If you've got something to say, please do use the super chats or consider joining the channel as well. Or if you'd like to make a one-off contribution, you can visit our Buy Us a Coffee page for just the price of a coffee. That'll go a great way to helping support our small but growing community. And as I said, been delighted and overwhelmed with the response to our videos recently, so thanks a lot for your continued support. And of course, do hit all the notification, thumbs up buttons, etc. to give us a boost on the algorithm. So we're going to move on now to, obviously, was International Women's Day the other day. We're going to check out some clips from an International Women's Day rally, as well as some of the speeches at the latest protest in London, calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. First of all, before we go to those, I want to quickly show you an appearance by Miriam Francois, who's been very outspoken against the government recently. I don't know if you follow them on social media, but this was a fantastic appearance recently, and again, just completely 100% on form. Couldn't agree more. So let's hear from Miriam Francois.
Look, we know what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a corrupt bunch, with corrupt mafia in power, as far as I'm concerned. And in order to distract the British public from the very, very righteous anger that they feel at the state of the country, they're using the classic divide and conquer strategy. Look over there. Look at the brown people over there doing terrible things. I genuinely don't know how many people are buying into this BS. I don't think it's as many as he might hope. I think it's really clear to everyone right now that this sort of dog whistling, this racial dog whistling, this attempt to sort of deflect responsibility from the abysmal, and I mean abysmal, performance that this government has given to Britain, is by stirring up racial hatred. So congratulations to Rishi, really a star on the stirring up racial hatred card. The reality is that actually the Palestine marches are a march for a ceasefire. They're march for humanity. They are predominantly, I've been to many of them, attended by families and people who just really want an end to the bloodshed. So let's put it this way. If Rishi's listening, and I really hope you are, if it's extremist to want all lives to be equally important and to want a ceasefire, then cool. We're all extremists. We'll take it. But, I just don't think anyone cares what Rishi has to say anymore. He's a waste man. Like literally, that's one of the chants, right, on the marches is Rishi is a waste man, and it's never, ever been truer.
Rishi Sunak's a waste man. Rishi Sunak's a waste man. Yeah, never a true word spoken. It's disgusting to see Sunak try to label Muslims as extremists, try to label peaceful protesters as a violent hate mob. These marches come from a position of love and peace, and as Miriam Francois pointed out there, all people are calling for is an end to a genocide in which at least 31,000 people have been killed, tragically and disgustingly so far, and that's not even counting all of the bodies that haven't been accounted for that are still held under the rubble of Gaza as Israel continues to sweep through the country and leaving in its wake a path of death and destruction. Because of YouTube's terms of service, I'm not able to show you some of the clips that I've seen recently on social media from the footage live from the ground in Gaza. And I'm not just saying this, I'm not being dramatic. Some of the things I've seen in the last few weeks and over the last 4 months of I've had to leave the room. They've brought me to tears. They've been absolutely appalling, and women and children still account for over 50% of the deaths in Gaza. And a lot of the examples really are just too graphic to even describe. So I won't be showing those clips. I won't be graphically describing those clips. But there have been times when I've had to leave the room because I felt like I was about to be sick. And I'm not just saying that to be dramatic or emphasise a point. It is literally heartbreaking and soul destroying to see what is happening day by day there in Gaza. But I am more than aware that all of our viewers and listeners and followers in complete support for Palestine. We just have to keep this solidarity together. These marches have to continue. The one that was in London on Saturday had around 400,000 people in it, and these are the kind of numbers that we're going to be seeing every week, and we're going to be throwing that back in Rishi Sunak's face. How dare he try and ban protesting? How dare he try and label peaceful protesters in the way that he has been doing recently? Absolutely beggars belief. And now we're going to move across to a speech about International Women's Day, of course. Solidarity to the mothers. Today this live stream goes out to all the mothers and women out there across the world. And this was a great speech from Cuba, actually.
Cuando este 8 de marzo conmemoremos el Día Internacional de la Mujer, estaremos rindiendo homenaje a las mujeres palestinas que se enfrentan a las maquinarias de opresión sionista en todos los campos, a las que siguen firmes y resistentes en las prisiones de ocupación israelí. Durante más de 75 años, las mujeres palestinas han sido símbolo de coraje, voluntad y resistencia en la lucha por la liberación y la ocupación, en la lucha por sus derechos nacionales a la soberanía territorial. Constituye la vanguardia de la resistencia. Las cubanas ratificamos nuestra solidaridad con las mujeres y el pueblo palestino. Exigimos el cese del genocidio, que con la complicidad de Estados Unidos socava la paz, la seguridad y la estabilidad de la región y el mundo. Las mujeres palestinas merecen su libertad, su independencia y soberanía. ¡Viva Palestina libre! ¡Viva! Palestina no está sola.
Viva, viva, Palestina, indeed. Yeah, of course, should have pointed out that's in Spanish, but hope you could follow along with the subtitles there. That clip comes from Breakthrough Television. Do give them a follow as well. Wolfpet, thank you so much for that gift in the chat. Great to see you tonight. Hope you're very well. Thanks a lot for your contribution. Great to see you as well. And yeah, we do stand in solidarity with all of the women of Palestine. I've heard recently cases of pregnant ladies having to have C-sections without anaesthetic because of the devastation that's happening in all of the hospitals. There's now not a single hospital in all of Gaza that hasn't been bombed. There aren't any universities left. They've all been razed to the ground. And as mothers struggle to feed the children and provide water for the children, just want to give an extra shout out of solidarity for all of the women and all of the mothers in Palestine who are suffering tremendously at this time. And yes, thanks again, Wolfpet, for your gift there. Much appreciated. Thanks a lot for helping to contribute towards the channel. And thanks a lot for all of your other comments as well. Odin Allfather, Lino, Labour in name only. Of course, yeah, we'll be talking more about that through the stream. Of course, you will no doubt have heard, excuse me, you will no doubt have heard that Charlotte Church made an appearance at yesterday's London March and led a choir of voices in song, in a song dedicated to the Palestinian struggle. I'm not going to play the song and the speech. It's likely that you've already seen excerpts from that already. She did speak to the media afterwards, so we're going to have a look at what she had to say in that interview. She was, of course, there were, of course, attempts to criticise her recently for another appearance where she led a song in solidarity with Palestine. And it just goes to show the desperate tactics that the media, the Zionists and the right wing try to use against anybody who's calling for peace. So obviously Charlotte Church helping to bring a lot of media attention to this. She's of course a well-known public figure and has been for some years as a singer and in choirs and in opera, etc. Hugely talented lady. So let's see what Charlotte Church had to say.
So I am here today to show my solidarity with the people of Palestine and with all of the people of the UK who are very bravely upholding our democratic rights to be able to come out onto the streets and show our displeasure in a very peaceful and loving and strong way.
And why do you think that more public figures like yourself aren't coming out and speaking up in support of Palestine?
I'm not sure why more public figures aren't coming out and speaking about Palestine. I feel like, you know, clearly there is risk in it because the risk of being labelled an anti-Semite almost immediately, which is what happened to me. And so I think people are worried about, they feel like they've got too much to lose. Personally, I think that this is the biggest spiritual quest of our time. And I can do nothing but be a part of this movement and be a part of this fight. I feel like this is not just for the people of Palestine who are currently experiencing the worst thing I've ever seen, I've ever lived through on planet Earth. So for me, like my empathy is at such a level that I literally can do nothing but as much as I could possibly do to call for a ceasefire immediately, to stop the horrific suffering that is happening to Palestinian people, particularly to Palestinian children and to Palestinian women, Palestinian civilians, but also because it's something that is happening here is striking at the very heart of all of our freedoms and our ability to call for something better. There is something about, you know, what is being represented, what is symbolic somehow, and I can't quite put it into very good erudite phrases or words, but there's something about the Palestinian cause right now, which means the freedom and the betterment of society and civilization for all of us.
I do agree with that, because if it can happen to Palestinians, it can happen to everybody. There are obviously other humanitarian crises going on throughout the world, in Yemen, in Sudan, for example, and it is quite right that we speak about those as well. But as Charlotte Church is pointing out here, this is sort of definitively where it comes to people's morality, where it comes to the rights of people. This is where it's at, this conflict. It's not even a conflict, it's an occupation and a genocide, as we know. A war is when two sides are fighting, not just when one are being exterminated. And let's be very frank in the language that we're using. But that really does kind of sum up the symbolism of the plight of Palestinians at the moment, because if it could happen there, it could happen anywhere else across the world. And these people are left defenceless. Let's just remind ourselves, they don't have an army to defend themselves with. They don't have a navy. They don't have an air force. And it's like a turkey shoot out there. People are really left defenceless, and it's an appalling crisis that definitely needs highlighting.
We want to live in a different sort of and have a different future, which isn't completely reliant upon, or completely in submission to capitalist interests. If we want to have a society that is built on community and compassion and love, and that centres life, and that centres children, and that centres women and mothers, then So I am here for all of those reasons today, mostly in solidarity with my Palestinian brothers and sisters and siblings, but also in solidarity with my brothers and sisters and siblings in the UK who are wanting to fight this oppression.
Charlotte Church there. That interview comes from Novara Media. I'm sure that you've heard of Novara Media already, so just giving credit where it's due there. And we're going to go on to talk a little bit about the aid situation now, as well as protests coming from within Israel. A lot of people within Israel want Benjamin Netanyahu to be shown the door for various reasons, whether it's over the hostage situation, that the hostages haven't been returned. At the last round of negotiations, Israel didn't even show up, but they're acting as though that they're trying to do everything in their power to get the hostages back from Hamas. There are even reports that Israel have bombed areas, have killed areas that their own hostages are being held in, and whether it's because of how the war is perpetuating or the hostage situation or the fact that they just don't want a Zionist in office, people are actually showing up in droves at the moment. It's a bit late in the day, but we're finally seeing people from inside Israel start to turn on Netanyahu. We'll quickly have a look at that now. There is an article I just want to skim through quickly. So this is a protest at the National Holocaust Museum. Obviously, there's a pro-Palestine protest. This isn't from within Israel itself. Activists calling for a ceasefire gathered in a square near National Holocaust Museum in the city's Jewish quarter in Amsterdam, that is. And this article from the BBC. Some of the people protesting there were themselves Jewish. Of course, we've seen the Jewish bloc on the marches in London as well, and this whole anti-Semitism trope is really, really wearing thin at the moment. It's obviously always been a scam, it's always been a ruse, it's been a complete con, a complete misnomer, and a complete lie. And I've been putting that to a lot of the online trolls as well recently, who are still trying to accuse Palestinian supporters of anti-Semitism. How can that be the case when so many Jewish people, as well as Christians, Muslims, people of all faiths and no faiths are on the marches? I've personally been on Palestine demos with friends who are Jewish as well. So both Palestinian and Israeli flags were seen among the crowd. It says some protesters climbed onto police vans and riot police beat them away as they started to throw fireworks, eggs. Dutch media outlet De Telegraaf reported. Is that their version of the Torygraph, perhaps? Protesters climbing onto police vans. Yeah, that's normally Just Stop Oil's gig, but if that tactic's spreading, then I guess that's good to see. People standing up to authority. Signs were seen reading Jews Against Genocide, and the grandchild of a Holocaust survivor says, "Stop Gaza Holocaust." Of course, we're all aware of the difference between a country and a religion. Being a critic of Israel doesn't mean by any means that you're an anti-Semite. In fact, the horrible crimes that Israel are committing at the moment are anti-Semitic. Of course, the people of Palestine are Semites themselves. The museum said it had invited Mr. Herzog, that's the other kind of prime minister in Israel. They invited him before the Hamas attack on 7th of October, which led to Israel's ground offensive in Gaza. In a statement, it said it recognised Mr. Herzog's attendance, raised questions, but added that he represented the homeland of Dutch Holocaust survivors who had emigrated to Israel. In a speech, Israel's president said the museum would remember the horrors born of hatred, anti-Semitism and racism. Of course, anti-Semitism and all forms of racism are utterly disgusting, but to try and use them as political footballs detracts from the actual real cases of anti-Semitism that exist in our society and need stamping out, of course. But to just point at people who don't agree with you politically and try and label them anti-Semitic is, of course, pathetic. We went on to add, unfortunately, never again is now, right now, because right now hatred and anti-Semitism are flourishing worldwide and we must fight it together. See, that's just classic case of Zionist lies there. He called for an immediate and safe return of hostages taken by Hamas in the 7th of October attacks. Well, here's a suggestion for you, Mr. Herzog, and you can pass this on to Benjamin Netanyahu as well, if you would. How about actually attending the negotiations where hostages are supposed to be exchanged in the deal, including returning the 150 hostages back to Israel? Another good idea might be to not indiscriminately bomb the areas that the hostages are being held in. Perhaps you might have considered the fact that you could potentially kill one of your own country's hostages if you are just indiscriminately bombing everywhere and then trying to use pathetic excuses such as we saw with the hospitals recently, trying to say that there's a Hamas base there are Hamas tunnels here, there's a Hamas base in this child's face. It just doesn't wash. They were met with booing from the crowds as they arrived at this museum, and rightly so. In a speech to Dutch Holocaust survivors gathering at a nearby synagogue, King William Alexander said, "This museum shows us what devastating consequences anti-Semitism can have. The Holocaust Museum will open to the public on Monday to mark almost 80 years since World War II ended. It will display 2,500 objects that have not been seen in public before. Before the Nazi occupation, the Netherlands was home to a huge Jewish community of around 140,000 people. Of course, the Holocaust is a very dark stain on the planet's history, something that we never want to see happen again. The irony, of course, being that Israel, as a nation, has turned completely fascist and is run by right-wing Zionists. How ironic is that in terms of history? What future historians will make of the situation that we're in today? I would like to know what people would think of this in 100 years' time. Final stat in the article there, it's estimated that 75% of those 140,000 people were murdered during the Holocaust. Something that we never want to see again. But of course, the collective punishment is ongoing in Palestine, unfortunately, and Israel are going to be on the wrong side of history, and no amount of appearances at the opening of national Holocaust museums is going to change that, as we can see President Isaac Herzog there giving a speech during the opening ceremony of the National Holocaust Museum. Just go back to the homepage as well. There was another article just wanted to quickly point out surrounding this port that the US are going to be setting up in Palestine, in Gaza. Now they're saying it's to help aid get through. They obviously have a lot of political influence on Israel. The problem at the moment isn't getting aid to the area surrounding Gaza. There are hundreds of trucks waiting, but the convoys are being blocked and or attacked as well. We spoke last week about that attack on the flour convoy, where Israelis shot several Palestinians dead and then tried to blame it on a rush, on a stampede. But in this case, a lot of people think that this is just a ruse and that the actual port will be used to facilitate the extraction of natural resources from Gaza, which I say is something that's quite likely. We do, of course, know America's reputation for going to, quote, rescue countries, and then they just use it to pilfer oil, gas, other natural resources. We saw that in Iraq, in both of the Iraq wars. We've seen it in Afghanistan. And isn't it a coincidence that the countries that America choose to involve in their foreign affairs, in the industrial military complex, just so happen to have a huge wealth of natural resources as the private fossil fuel companies and billionaires try and make a last grasp for profits before we have to move across to renewable energy. They know that we're going to have to move across to renewable energy at some point, but they're still trying to milk out every cent of profit as possible. Let's just take a quick skim through that article. Let us know your thoughts about what you think about this situation. Is this a genuine attempt to get aid in, or just a cunning ruse to get fossil fuels out of Gaza? So the support ship, which is General Frank S. Beeson, set sail from a military base in the state of Virginia on Saturday. It comes after Joe Biden said the US would build the floating harbour to get the aid to Gaza by sea. As I said, it's not getting the aid to the area around Gaza that's the problem. It's actually getting it into Gaza that's the problem. We're going to see a clip from the fantastic Normal Finkelstein shortly as well, who goes into this in a bit more of a comprehensive and granular detail, but that's the long and short of it for now. The United Nations has warned that famine in the Gaza Strip is almost inevitable, and a stat that I heard in the last 24 hours that was 1 in 5 children in Gaza are suffering from acute malnutrition. Not just malnutrition, acute malnutrition. And we talk about ironies, as with we were just mentioning with fascism and the Holocaust earlier. A lot of the pictures that I've seen from hospitals of starving children in those hospitals are very reminiscent of the scenes that we saw in concentration camps during the Second World War in places like Auschwitz and Dachau. And it is, of course, awful that anybody on the planet should have to go through that, but just increasingly ironic that Israel are the perpetrators of this. So it's not just inevitable, I would say. I would say that it is happening now. It is a famine. The United States and Jordan carried out an airdrop on Sunday, parachuting in more than 11,500 meals that included rice, flour, pasta, canned food, the US military said. How about sending the US Army there to go alongside the convoy? Would that help? Do you think that Israel are going to start firing on the US military? They could do that. They, of course, have a massive amount of influence on Israel. Perhaps that would help. And a lot of people have criticised these airdrops, just not because of the method that's being used. There are more efficient ways to get food into Gaza. But 5 people were killed in the airdrops. They were parachuting pallets of food down, and it ended up killing 5 people. And if you want some sort of Team America analogy, that would fit in a deleted scene from that film, I'm sure. America showing up to a country to give aid and end up killing the population in the process of dropping the aid on them. Have you ever heard anything more fitting than that surrounding this? It says aid deliveries by land and air have proved difficult and dangerous. The World Food Programme had to pause land deliveries after its convoys came under gunfire and looting, and on Friday there were reports that 5 people had been killed by a falling aid package when its parachute failed to open properly. Obviously just referred to that there as well. But how about stopping funding and arming Israel as well? There's no point, as I said before, throwing a few crumbs on the table with this aid relief when at the same time they are perpetuating this disaster by continuing to fund Israel to the tune of billions of dollars, as well as selling arms exports as well. And the United Kingdom are culpable of that as well. BAE, obviously, are guilty of the same thing. So send a convoy down there with a US Army escort, and let's see if the IDF want to start to open fire then. I'm sure that Biden has got that in his power, but he chooses not to do it, of course. Biden says the shipments are carrying the first equipment to establish a temporary pier to deliver vital humanitarian supplies to Gaza, the statement continued. The Pentagon said it could take up to 60 days to build the pier with the help of 1,000 troops, none of whom would go ashore. 60 days? Should it really take that long? I'm sure historians amongst you will be familiar with cases where bridges and temporary piers and ports have had to be constructed in a much shorter time scale than that. The invasion of Normandy, for example, is one example. Even going back to the Napoleonic era, when they had to rebuild bridges that were destroyed by retreating armies, they managed to get bridges up and things such as that in a couple of days. I'm sure that in 2024 it shouldn't take 2 months to build a pier. I'm sure that we've got the technology to do that a lot quicker. Charities have said that those suffering in Gaza cannot wait that long. Of course, meanwhile, an aid ship laden with some 200 tons of food had been expected to set sail from a port in Larnaca, Cyprus on Sunday afternoon. Cypriot media reported, you might have heard about that as well. It follows an EU announcement that a new sea route will be opened over the weekend to allow aid to sail directly from Cyprus. That's the closest EU country to Gaza. There you can see the open arms aid ship, it says, has been ready to depart for weeks. The charity's founder has said. How many lives have been lost in those weeks? This is coming far too late. We're well into the 4th month of this escalation now, and things could be happening a lot more efficiently and a lot quicker. However, Oscar Camps, the founder of Open Arms, told AP that the destination point, which remains a secret, a team from the World Central Kitchen has been building a pier to receive the aid. Not sure how long that'll be able to stay a secret for if you're building temporary ports and piers. I think that's going to be visually at least very prominent and will be found out almost immediately. Well, we'll see. Place your bets. Would it be completely beyond ridiculous to suggest that the construction of this pier and these temporary ports will come under attack by the IDF? I, for one, certainly won't be surprised. Let us know your thoughts in the chat. Thanks a lot. Just quickly want to say thanks a lot for joining us tonight on the Let's Talk live stream. Please keep your comments coming in, and don't forget to hit the subscribe, thumbs up and notification buttons. Consider joining the channel and checking out our great packages that we've got on offer there for lots of fantastic perks. And thanks for all your contributions so far. The article, I'll just briefly read through this before we move on, says that more than 30,900 people have been killed in Gaza since then. The territory's Hamas-run health ministry says, as I pointed out earlier, that number will of course go up significantly once the bodies under the rubble are counted for. Although, however much Israel are going to genuinely count those or try and suppress those numbers remains to be seen. The conflict has created a growing humanitarian crisis. United Nations has warned at least 576,000 people across the Gaza Strip. 1/4 of the population are facing catastrophic levels of food insecurity. Western countries have pressed Israel to expand land deliveries by facilitating more routes and opening additional crossings. Of course, with Netanyahu, he's not going to play ball. This guy is an unhinged Zionist, far-right, fascist maniac, and expecting 1 ounce of humanity from the likes of him, unfortunately, isn't going to get you very far. Israel's been accused of hampering aid efforts, and an independent United Nations expert last week accused it of mounting a starvation campaign against the Palestinian people in Gaza. And of course, there is footage going around of Netanyahu openly admitting that it is a collective punishment. They're trying to starve Palestinians out of their own country. Yila Sitrin, a legal advisor at the Israeli mission to the United Nations, responded that Israel utterly rejects allegations that it is using starvation as a tool of war, before walking out in protest. Yeah, they're getting increasingly desperate with the propaganda. They forget that we're in the 21st century. We're in the communications age. Despite the fact that so many journalists are being killed in this conflict, more journalists already have been killed than in the Vietnam War, both world wars combined, and we're only 4 months in. Despite that, the information is getting out there. We're in the digital age, we're in the communications age, and seeing them respond so pathetically to things that are clearly verifiably true is just utterly desperate, and just goes to show how pathetic these right-wing Zionists are. So let us know what you think about that. As I said, certainly have my reservations. We could be seeing oil and natural gas pouring out of Palestine in a very short amount of time. Of course, the United States of America have a reputation for that internationally, unfortunately, as the grasp for resources and the industrial military complex tragically marches on. The colonialists are not Semites, the Palestinians are Semites. Odin Allfather, yeah, you're absolutely correct there in the chat. I couldn't agree more. It just reeks of desperation. Before we move on, I will quickly say, this is how I think that Israel thought that this was going to go. They assumed that what happened on the 7th of October would, and they made comparisons at the time between that and the events of the 11th of September 2001 in America, the World Trade Center and Pentagon attacks. Of course, they thought that the entire world would be appalled and that they would get behind them. And we obviously saw the mess that prevailed and followed that in Afghanistan and Iraq, where over 2 million people were killed in the US and UK-backed occupation there. But they thought that they would have the sympathy for everybody and that the tropes, their anti-Semitic lies would follow through. But that's not been the case. And people have showed out in droves to protest and voice the truth. And now they're on the back foot and they can't take it. They've gone through Plan B. They've gone through Plan C. They're getting increasingly desperate. And the world is waking up now. And people are standing up. Not just in the streets of London and other cities across the world. People are standing up in parliaments all across the world. We've seen people, MEPs, such as Claire Daly and Mick Wallace, for example, make fantastic speeches in the European Parliament. We've seen amazing speeches in US Congress. In the United Kingdom, we've seen people such as Jeremy Corbyn, Zara Sultana standing up against this as well. And I just want to show you quickly another example of MPs who still have moral credibility left these days, which are unfortunately a few and far between. But Claudia Webb, who's the MP for Leicester, made a fantastic impassioned speech at the most recent demonstration in London, and we're going to cut across to see what she had to say as well. More MPs need to be doing this, and as we saw in Rochdale recently with George Galloway, as we go towards the next general election, the situation in Gaza is going to be on a lot of people's minds, and we're not getting into race-baiting territory here. This isn't just an issue for Muslims. So many people of all faiths and no faith are speaking out against this conflict as well, and it will come into play. Andrew Feinstein, of course, is making a campaign against Keir Starmer's seats of Holborn and St Pancras. He's getting a tremendous amount of support as well. So this is very much in the public consciousness at the moment when people go to vote. Let's see what Claudia Webb had to say in this clip from last Saturday's protests in London.
Bringing you solidarity from the people of Leicester, standing in solidarity with the people of Palestine. Our so-called political leaders would have you believe that you are wrong for being here. It's not wrong to stop a genocide. It's not wrong to protest to stop war crimes. It's not wrong to protest to stop the killing of Palestinians. You are here on the right side of history. You are here standing up for justice whilst they gaslight and criminalise us. We are here. We are here to change the narrative and the politics of our nation. We are here to change the global political landscape. There are no ifs. There are no buffs. We will not be silent or silenced. We will not take our foot off the pedal. You are being here. You being here today sends a message of hope and solidarity, and a warning to Rishi Sunak, to Keir Starmer and the establishment who hope you will grow weary. You will not grow weary, and we will not forget.
I just want to point out as well how fantastic that is, that even though she is currently a Labour MP for Leicester, of course, one of the few decent Labour MPs that we've got left, but to directly call out Keir Starmer in front of a crowd of almost 500,000 people, over 400,000 people attended on Saturday, I think is absolutely fantastic. I'd love to see more of this. Well done, Claudia. Yeah, keep saying it like it is. You go, girl.
Israel's war on the civilians of Gaza has now killed more than 40,000 people and wounded twice as many. Women in Gaza are giving birth in the midst of a genocide, undergoing cesareans and emergency operations without sterilization, anesthesia or painkillers. And Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war. Boo! Our message is clear. Our message to Joe Biden is clear. Children are dying of famine and hunger and malnutrition now. If Biden really wants to save Gaza, he would call for an immediate ceasefire and stop arming Israel and restore the full funding to UNRWA. We see you. You're more concerned with billions and billions of dollars in the global trade than the lives of Palestinians. Let's send Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer a message too. For the Prime Minister making our point is far from over. And to Keir Starmer, calling it leadership.
Yeah, sorry, the clip just cut off the great speech. We've seen some amazing speeches at the rallies recently. As I said, from Zara Sultana as well, Jeremy Corbyn, Mick Lynch, many others, Eddie Dempsey as well, from the RNT, as well as the few decent Labour MPs that we've got left, and other independents. And that is one of the seats I'm going to have my eye on coming up to the next general election. I'm going to try and select what I'm going to call 5 hot seats to keep an eye on. I think that Andrew Feinstein really could make a decent challenge to Keir Starmer. How interesting would that be? I will be perfectly frank. I think at the moment, although the date of the election hasn't been called yet, I think Labour will probably manage to get over the line, but not with a massive landslide majority like a lot of the main political commentators are predicting. I think we could either see a minority Labour government or even a hung parliament. So that's one of the seats to keep an eye on as well. And Claudia Webb's the MP for Leicester, of course. And we just need to see more of this. We need to see more MPs stepping up and speaking the truth like it is. And speaking of truth, also one of the lies that has been going around recently, and I believe it was an American commentator who first started to perpetuate this, and now it's been picked up over here, that certain areas in London, I remember Tower Hamlets was one of them that was mentioned, have been labelled as no-go zones, that people are fearing for their lives in having to walk through these areas because they've been taken over by religious extremists. But of course that isn't the case. It's just another lie that comes along with this war and genocide, and lots of people who live in Tower Hamlets and have done for a very long time pointed out that that's far from the case. So this next clip just dives into that a little bit more. Yeah, well done, Claudia. Well done, Claudia Webb. And as we move through every weekend, I'm sure that these protests will continue, and we'll see some more fantastic speeches from people such as Claudia.
just let the front of the march go a little bit ahead of us, and we're about 50 or so metres behind the front now. This march, they've come in their busloads, it has to be said. And they started up in Park Lane, and there's clearly a very large gathering. For all the noise and clamour, the actual political noise ahead of this march has been loud. Rishi Sunak warning of mob rule taking over democratic rule, appearing on the steps of Downing Street, warning of extremists amongst the ranks, and we heard from the extremists are saying this would be a no-go zone for Jewish people. Actually, in the banner behind me here, this is a group of Jewish people who have joined the march in solidarity. And actually, let's just have a quick chat with one of them, Gillian Mosley, at the front here. Gillian, what brings you here?
I'm here because I want an immediate ceasefire and not a provisional ceasefire. And I think our government needs to take responsibility for the fact that it's still arming Israel and is complicit in the massacre of 30,000+ people in Gaza, including 20,000 women and children.
What do you think of the idea of this being a no-go zone for Jewish people?
I think that's absurd. Obviously, I'm surrounded by Jews. We're in central London. I also live in central London and have lots of Jewish neighbours, and none of us are scared.
Do you worry, though, that there are extremist elements, as the Prime Minister warned, within the ranks of this protest?
I've never experienced it, so of course it's possible, but I have had no first-hand experience of that.
Okay, thank you very much, Joe. Nice to talk to you. But it is very divisive. There are people from Jewish communities I spoke to yesterday who are worried about coming to central London.
But they'll be Zionists, is the thing. Those people who say that they're afraid to leave their houses will be open Zionists. You can see there are thousands and thousands of Jewish protesters on that march, and the lady who was interviewed just there absolutely spoke the truth and nailed it on the head. I'm quite pleasantly surprised, I have to say, that this report is coming from Sky News. Perhaps the reporter's earpiece got broken. They're not normally so quick to dispel the lies that are being put out by the government, so that is kind of refreshing to see. But the only people that you will hear saying that they're scared to go out of their houses will, of course, be Zionists who are trying to put on the crocodile tears and trying to get on the Oscar reel, pretending that they're very fearful for their safety, when in fact you can see there clearly this was a peaceful march, and Jews, of course, are more than welcome to join any Palestinian march.
I do worry that there is an anti-Semitic element amongst this protest, but for the vast majority of people here, they are here simply calling for a ceasefire.
Yeah, and you're probably aware of an incident yesterday. Was it yesterday? Yeah, on the march where there was an arrest, and videos of it were going around social media. There was a Zionist walked into the march with a sign saying that Hamas are terrorists. He incited a disturbance. That's what he was arrested for, as well as slapping a police officer. And no doubt you've seen Zionists on Twitter or the social media trying to make out that he was arrested for holding up the sign when that's not the case. The police have a duty of care, and when someone walks into a peaceful march and tries to create a disturbance, it is their job to de-escalate that and to get the person away from the march to avoid risk of causing any conflict. But then he slapped a police officer. He was later de-arrested, should point out as well. But that's why he was arrested. It wasn't for holding up a sign. And fortunately, which again is a pleasant surprise, the Metropolitan Police haven't gone along with what Rishi Sunak was saying in his speech about his speech outside Number 10, and actually properly policed the march yesterday. That was the only real incident that I've heard of, and it came from a Zionist. So the troublemakers, as I pointed out earlier, as I always say, the trouble always comes from the right. The racism always comes from the right, never from the left. So what, have Sky News turned a corner now? Perhaps they getting on board with where public opinion is and realising that what Israel says, what Rishi Sunak says is obviously a load of horse crap. So pleasantly surprised to see Sky News pointing out that Jewish people are not only safe on these marches, they're more than welcome, because at the end of the day, and I know this from having spoken to a lot of personal friends of mine from the Jewish faith, they don't want these things, this genocide, this collective punishment being done in their name. There is a clear difference, obviously, between Judaism and Zionism. Zionism really isn't Judaism, because one of the principal elements of the faith is to protect and preserve life. Clearly, an occupation and a genocide doesn't fit into that and doesn't marry up with the true sentiments of the religion of Judaism, of course. So don't fall for it. I'm sure that our viewers and listeners are more than aware of this, and a lot of the mainstream media seem to think that we're more naive than we actually are. And I mentioned Norman Finkelstein gave a great interview earlier. We're going to dive into that clip next. It's always great to see Norman Finkelstein speaking, whether it's in public or in interviews. He's a great orator as well. So he's going to go into this in a bit more detail. We're going to have a little bit of a comedy break before we get back to some domestic affairs. Going to have a quick chat about the budget from Jeremy Kant, and then move on to a few other topics, including the defacing of the Thatcher statue, which I'm sure that you heard about as well. You know, not all heroes wear capes. We're going to be diving into that, as well as a few more issues. Quite a lot to get through, as I said, on tonight's live stream. And goodness me, we've already been going for over an hour and a half. Hasn't that flown by? Just before I move on, I'll just have a quick look in the chat. Let's address one or 2 points here. Wolfpet, yeah, journalists were targeted for a reason. Thankfully, info is still getting out, just going back to the number of journalists that have been killed in Palestine recently. Yeah, of course, they're trying to suppress the truth. It's a pathetic attempt. It's awful that members of the press, even wearing bulletproof vests with press clearly written on them, have been targeted. These aren't sort of people getting caught in the crossfire or collateral damage, as it were. They are being targeted specifically for reporting the truth. And if you can't speak the truth, then you've really got to look yourself in the mirror and question what you're about. Absolutely right. Wolfpet, thanks a lot for that comment as well, and thanks a lot for all of your other comments on tonight's My Left Eye live stream. Thanks a lot for joining us. Okay, Norman's going to lay it on the line here. Let's see this latest interview from him.
President Biden has turned the Gaza genocide into a photo op for himself. Ursula von der Leyen, who's one of the key supporters of the genocide, is now trying to clear her name. She's a bona fide war criminal. It's not for no reason that Claire Daly in the European Parliament calls her Frau Genocide.
We did see a clip from Claire Daly on the last live stream we did as well. She's always fantastic in speaking up for Palestinian causes as well. Do check out her stuff, as well as her fellow MEP Mick Wallace, both representing Ireland, and Frau Genocide. Yeah, that's her nickname. And she also was massively critical of Joe Biden for trying to refer to his Irish roots recently as well. She called him out for his participation in the genocide as well. Claire Daly, hats off to her, and Mick Wallace as well.
Or as I prefer to call her, the Nazi princess. Now let's get down to the facts. There's no problem with getting food and medicine to the periphery of Gaza. There are hundreds of trucks which are ready to go in. It doesn't change anything one whit if there is a floating pier on the water periphery of Gaza. That's not the problem. The problem is getting the food and the medicine from the periphery to the people. And Israel is blocking that. It's blocking it both physically and also by its continued indiscriminate bombing to terrorize the civilian population. There's something truly sickening when the President of the United States turns the martyrdom of the people of Gaza into an election year photo op. He's trying to recreate the Berlin airlift of 1948, this time by building a floating pier. I don't know why he just doesn't call on Captain Kirk from the Starship Enterprise to beam down Morton pot pies. This is so preposterous, so ridiculous. The idea that any sane person, any rational person can take seriously at this point in time the words of the two key supporters of the Gaza genocide outside Israel, namely Ursula von der Leyen, Frau Genocide, the Nazi princess, and President Biden. It's simply bewildering. But frankly, I don't believe it fools anybody except for those ghouls inside the Democratic Party bubble.
And Norman, President Biden and Ursula von der Leyen would no doubt refute those claims were they here to do so. They
might deny the claims, but the factual evidence denies them the option of refuting the claims. There can be no question whatsoever that the two key supporters of the Gaza genocide outside the state of Israel are Ursula von der Leyen and Joe Biden. That is not up for debate. That is not controversial. That is an irrefutable fact.
And clearly what the people of Gaza need right now, Norman, is humanitarian aid in huge amounts. And therefore, what is needed is a diplomatic solution to try and establish further abilities to get that aid into Gaza. Do you hold any positive hopes of a diplomatic solution?
No, I do not. Because Israel is determined, it's determined either to ethnically cleanse Gaza, turn Gaza into a wasteland, or to dispose of physically every living person, every sentient being in Gaza. And the United States will not exert the force to stop it. So I cannot say optimistic about a diplomatic settlement, but we should be clear on the facts. Number one, there is no lack of food or medicine earmarked for the people of Gaza. It's there. It doesn't require a floating bathtub. It's right there at the gates of Gaza. It's Israel that's blocking the delivery of the foodstuffs and the medicine. Number two, the chief supporters of the Gaza genocide are now trying to clear their names by pretending to be concerned about the fate of the people of Gaza.
And Norman, just while we have you briefly, you said back in 2020 that you'd given up on Gaza, much as it pained you. You'd spent enough of your life documenting and chronicling the plight of the people of Gaza, and that much as it pained you, you felt you had to therefore turn your back on it and move on with your life. How do you feel about Gaza and the future of Palestinians?
It would be a sin against man and a sin against God to turn your back on the people who have suffered relentless martyrdom by a heartless and at this point pathologically sick occupying power.
Norman Finkelstein there, spot on as always, pointing out the fact that these sentiments coming from America now are far too little, far too late. They've, of course, have been culpable in this occupation for a very long time now, and to try and throw a few crumbs on the table late on in the day is, of course, not nearly enough when it comes to what's needed to sort out this massive humanitarian crisis. So we're going to take a little comedy break now. Obviously, that's a bit of a heavy topic. Just try and lighten the mood a little on the live stream now. We showed this clip on the last stream just for anyone who wasn't with us last week. This is the latest from Jonathan Pye. He's going to talk about how he's looking forward to, or perhaps not, the upcoming US election, and what a choice they have between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Land of the free, so they say, but as Jonathan Pye points out here in this clip, that's far from the truth.
President Biden has turned the Gaza genocide into a...
Wrong clip. This is the one.
After what happened in the wake of the last election, many would have thought this impossible. The last time Donald Trump was on a ballot in a free and fair national election, he lost, refused to accept the results, and incited a deadly riot on Capitol Hill. And yet, Donald Trump will be on the ballot again, and all signs point towards a Trump-Biden rematch this November. Trump, 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 Trump. Trump. That's all you're going to hear until November. Trump, 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 Trump. And then, if I'm right, of course, for the next 4 years after that, because I can't see a way that he loses this rematch. Trump, 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 Trump. I honestly thought we'd seen the back of him. You know, I thought after his supporters took to the Capitol to hang Mike Pence and take a shit on Nancy Pelosi's desk, I thought things would settle down. But it seems as if January the 6th was like childbirth or a Big Mac. You forget how awful it was, and with enough time, you'll just give it another go. So I kind of thought he might be in prison by now. Instead, he's subsequently managed to persuade almost 40% of Americans that Biden stole the election from him. Trump, 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 Trump. He is chaos. He is everywhere. From a news and current affairs perspective, he's omnipotent. He's like God or Alison Hammond on every fucking channel, everywhere you look. It's insane that someone who is so glaringly unfit and unable to do the job of president could get anywhere near the Oval Office again. And there's the real problem. With this election, I could be talking about either candidate, Trump or Biden, a man who can barely string a sentence together up against a man who can barely string a sentence together. Trump, an insurrectionist and convicted fraudster guilty of tax offences on an industrial scale, an approved rapist in the civil courts, is on the ballot for president. And, according to the Democrats, of the 675 million US citizens that are eligible to run for president against him, there's only one man who can stop Trump, Joe Biden, about as dynamic as a digestive biscuit. A man who, when he walks into the room, everyone's going like, sorry, did he just escape from a home? A home for, let's be honest, nearly dead people. And on the ticket with him, a heartbeat away from the presidency, a woman only slightly more popular than Captain Tom Moore's daughter's sauna and steam room. Kamala Harris, living proof that liberals picking candidates on gender and skin colour alone isn't always electoral magic. Talent and charm can often go a long way as well. When will liberals learn to beat Trump? You don't need to have right on your side, you need decent candidates on your side. But as it stands, I cannot see a way that Trump doesn't retake the White House. Trump, 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 Trump. It's like boots marching. Trump, Trump, scary military boots marching, unstoppable. Trump, 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 Trump. And I know just banding around words like fascism and dictator and despot are, you know, generally lazy comparisons. But if you listen really carefully, Trump, 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 it does sound a little bit like they're goose-stepping. Trump, 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 goose-stepping into the Oval Office because Sleepy Joe and his Democrats were taking their afternoon nap. Trump, 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 yeah. Well, this could be an uphill battle for President Biden as polls this week suggest Trump edging ahead.
Yeah, what a choice. What a choice they've got as they go to the polls this year in America. I can't say that we're in much of a better situation as well with Sunak and Starmer. And of course, Donald Trump is a lot more favourable to Israel than Joe Biden is, if you can imagine that. I would imagine if he is brought into the presidency, if this port is open and bringing aid in, he would probably close that down immediately, as well as bring in another bunch of ridiculous politics. It's only ever people who are, should we say, below average intelligence or on the far right, or tragically a tragic combination of both, who find themselves wanting to support Donald Trump. But it's out the frying pan and into the fire every time in America, as I guess it is here as well. And I pointed out towards the top of the show that the recent mini budget from Jeremy Hunt, a lot of the policies in that were actually pilfered from Labour, and how close the two are allied. That budget, of course, was a disaster. Didn't do anything to help out ordinary working people. Again, it just goes to favour the top percentage of owners or people with the most expensive houses. Doesn't do anything. Doesn't really do anything. I think the most socialist element of that budget was probably that he froze duty on alcohol, for example. That's one thing. He didn't put the price of alcohol up, and that's about it. It's appalling, and people have been outraged, as we saw. Check out this picture from Jeremy Hunt's constituency office, which had a bit of a redecoration job shortly after his budget announcement. And you can see Southwest Surrey constituency office of Jeremy Hunt. Die Tory scum daubed on Hunt's constituency office. Of course, fans of The Simpsons will know that that's just the German for the Tory scum, of course. And I don't think, apart from the 1 second to the left there, it looks as though every window has been graffitied there. And I suppose that the Tories would come out and say that this is another threat that's being made towards the Tory parties. Another extremist has been to visit. But you think about how we've had austerity for so long in this country. They just beat down on ordinary people while they line their own pockets. You can't really argue with that. They truly are scum, as far as I and a lot of people are concerned. But as mentioned, that's not been the only incident of protest through graffiti that we've seen recently. A lady was pictured, CCTV footage was put out, and a manhunt or woman hunt was started after this lady put her views on the Margaret Thatcher statue, which is that now, Grantham, where she's from originally. This is what happened there. Tories out. I think that's another incident of graffiti, but the woman in question recently simply wrote the word bastard on Thatcher's statue. Of course, they've had to put the statue itself on top of this massive marble plinth. If it was at ground level, I dare say there probably wouldn't be a day that passed without some form of graffiti on it. Not sure if there have been any arrests made or if the woman remains at large, but as I said, not all heroes wear capes, and we need to get rid of the Tories. And if you don't think that Margaret Thatcher was a bastard, then I suggest you consult a psychologist or psychiatrist immediately. And that's just two of recent examples of people venting their frustration on statues there, of course. And the Tories not being much better. We're going to take a look now at Pat McFadden's reaction to the Tory budget. Pat McFadden is Labour. However, as we've seen far too often recently, they are just bedfellows, basically. They're inseparable. And Pat McFadden actually practically, praising Jeremy Hunt for his recent mini-budget. And just goes to show, doesn't it?
all of today's budget, as far as I can. You haven't said you opposed anything. You're backing all of today's budget. They've taken on some of your ideas. Obviously, you support that as well. You've got identical fiscal rules. How does Labour's economic policy then differ from the Conservatives?
Well, look, we're putting economic growth at the heart of our policy. Where we do differ, we will say where the money...
For a start, Pat, you get economic growth via public investment, which Rachel Reeves has obviously massively dismissed lately. They keep throwing out these phrases, these boardroom phrases like spaghetti being thrown against the wall and hoping that it will stick. And it always follows the phrase, what we're doing is this, what we are doing is that, we expect to, we will deliver this kind of thing. And it's just the same old tired language over and over again. I feel very patronised anytime I hear this condescending tone coming from MPs, whether it's a Tory or a Labour MP. The policies don't match the words that are coming out of their mouths. If we're going to have growth, we're going to have bigger public investment, and that is something that the Labour Party are turning their back on. They think people are fools. They're taking the British public for fools the same way that the Tory Party are.
It comes from. That's important and a duty of candour to people, and we can turn the page on the kind of chaos that we've had in recent years. If we get better economic growth, we generate the wealth needed for our public services.
She has just said, Victoria Derbyshire just pointed out to you that you are approving all of their policies and that in fact Jeremy Hunt has used Labour policies. How is that going to be any different? Vote for us, we're the same, but we're going to be different. How? And it doesn't matter if you say it in a nice, soft Scottish accent that maybe sounds a little bit innocent and totally like we're not coming for your wallets or anything. That's not going to wash. It doesn't wash. Pat McFadden knows it, Rachel Reeves knows it, Keir Starmer knows it, and the British public know it. Anyone who goes into the ballot box this year voting for Labour expecting anything different needs their heads checking. Don't come crying to me if in 5 years' time after Labour get in that we're in the same situation or far worse.
We get away from the doom loop that we've been in of low growth, increasing tax burden and creaking public services. You've got to break out of that, and you can't do it with the kind of economic debate we've been having at the moment.
Growth, growth, growth. I mean, how many times do we hear that word in political debate? I get sick of it. And obviously, economy. The economy is basically, it's not even a proper yardstick or metric for how well the country as a whole is doing. There's no magic number of GDP, as I've said before, that means that everybody has a job, we have full employment, everybody has a roof over their head, has access to basic needs. No, it's just basically a competition between the rich people, between rich businesses and individuals in terms of economy and growth. Like, do you think that hungry families wake up every morning? Do you think that hungry children who have had to skip breakfast before they go to school wake up every morning and go, oh, growth, if only we had some growth. We need equality is what we need. America is still marginally the top economy in the world, but it's probably going to get edged out by China probably by the end of the decade, if not sooner. And that's the top economy in the world. Is everybody in America employed? No. Does everybody in America have a house? No. People talk about the American dream, but the country in reality isn't like you see in the movies or in TV. You walk around the streets, you walk around the suburbs of any major city, New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, there are tent cities, homeless people as far as the eye can see, row after row of manufactured shanty setups where people are forced to stay, and that's the top economy in the world. It's not a metric or a yardstick for how well you're looking after your citizens. It is just a comparison of how one country's rich people are doing compared to another country's rich people. and nothing more. And this is pathetic from Pat McFadden. Victoria Derbyshire, I do have to say, is one of the better presenters on the BBC. I'd certainly rather have her than people such as Laura Kussenberg or Question Time's Fiona Bruce. If Victoria Derbyshire was on there, she wouldn't be towing the Tory line as often as Fiona Bruce does. Of course, her husband being a major contributor to the Tory party and has made several donations towards them as well, supporting them financially. You don't get that with Victoria Derbyshire. She's one of the better ones. You could tell by the expression on her face that she's not swallowing this from Pat McFadden. And goodness, what are we going to do? Right, back to Rachel Reeves. We'll just we're quickly checking on how the party's going before we see. You won't believe, if you've not seen this clip, what she said about trying to fund Labour policy if they get into government. But it really does beg a belief. Just a quick dip into the party before we check out that clip. Rachel? Well, she's clearly getting prepped to give the country and the economy a massive boost there. So in this clip, it was put to her how she might fund Labour's manifesto proposals. Obviously, we're still waiting for the official manifestos to come out from each party. But this suggestion of how she might try and rake in a few quid really does beg a belief. It's only a brief clip. Just bear with me here.
Differently.
So what we need is a plan for growth. We need to get people back to work. There are 700,000 more people due to be on sickness benefits. And that, of course, is a huge cost to the economy with...
Oh, sorry about that. Just a sec.
Differently.
So what we need is a plan for growth.
Well, straight away, bang in. Growth. Came out with growth. Like it's some sort of magic spell. You know, these words to Rachel Reeves and to the Tories are almost like magic. Growth. We've said growth. And then what follows is unbelievable. Sorry, that clip was quite a bit shorter than I was expecting.
We need to get people back to work. There are 700,000 more people due to be on sickness benefits.
So she's going to go straight for people who are on sickness and disability benefits. Is that right? 700,000 people who can't work because they're too sick. They can't work, or they can't work in certain sectors or certain areas because of their disabilities. Rachel's not having any of that. She's going to drag people out of the hospital beds and get them straight in the gulag. And this is coming from a Labour MP, not a Tory MP. And she's really going to squeeze the sick and disabled people of this country as part of her plan for sorting out the shape of the country's finances. It beggars belief. It beggars belief that we don't really have a proper alternative in terms of the main opposition. How far the Labour Party have come away from socialism in the last 5 years is truly heartbreaking. Like I said earlier, imagine if we were 5 years into Corbyn's government, things would of course be a lot different. We'd have full nationalisation, etc. You certainly wouldn't see these kind of suggestions coming from Rachel Reeves. In terms of sickness pay, in terms of pensions and things like this, Britain is already the lowest or one of the lowest paying countries in Europe. And now she wants to drag people out of the sick beds, out of the hospital beds, off the crutches, out of the wheelchairs or mobility scooters, and kick them into a McDonald's and start cracking the whip and say, get to it. And then they'll say, well, can we at least have £15 an hour? And she'll say, no, get to fuck. This is what you're faced with. This is what you're faced with Labour. She's just a poor imitation of Thatcher and nothing else. When you listen to this woman, what she's actually saying, if you can stand listening to her voice for more than 30 seconds at a time without having to go off and have a nervous breakdown. I wanted to put a clip in the live stream, actually. I wasn't sure how it might get affected by the copyright, and I can't remember exactly when it came into my head that I might want to use the clip on the live stream. This is a little bit out there, but for those of you who are fans of sci-fi or whatever, if you're familiar with the film Superman 3, there's a scene in that where a huge supercomputer has been built to try and kill Superman, and one of the female antagonists in the film actually gets attacked by this super AI computer, dragged into it and turned into a robot. And it's hard to discern between that fiction and the shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves as we see here before us. Just completely the same, almost exactly the same haircut as well, which is strange, although it will be no surprise to me if Rachel Reeves gets her mum cut by her hair, who also decides what clothes that she's going to wear as well. Absolutely won't be a surprise. But she's just as monotonal and robotic as Keir Starmer is. And if we're going to be seeing her on our TV screens over the next 5 years, if Labour get into government, then I think it might be time to hide behind the sofa there. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. There's literally nothing that is making people want to rush out and vote for Labour. All that they're doing is waiting for the ground to collapse underneath the Tories, which it will. The Tories are going to lose a lot of seats, and they're just expecting to walk in and pick up the pieces and stroll into office. But it's not going to be that easy. We've seen what Galloway did. We've seen a lot of support for independents as well, and the Greens as well. A lot of genuinely socialist grassroots parties, independents and the Green Party are going to cause a few upsets, I'm sure. Nobody's rushing out to vote for Labour. We saw it was either in the Kingswood by-election or the other one recently that Labour only gained 100 votes, whereas the Tories lost, thousands upon thousands of votes. They didn't go across to Labour. People just stayed at home. No one's rushing out to vote for Labour or excited to vote for them. She certainly isn't creating an air of excitement, nor is Keir Starmer. You can remember 5 years ago the amount of great speeches that Jeremy Corbyn was making in public to crowds of thousands of people, in football stadiums, on town hall steps, even at Glastonbury, to a massive rousing reception. People genuinely had hope then. You don't see Keir Starmer doing that kind of thing. In fact, he avoids public appearances like the plague, mostly down to a lack of wit and personality. If it's not written down on a piece of paper, he can't say it. He can't just get up there and jam or improvise the way that Jeremy Corbyn can. He has to have it written down for him, word for word, like he does with his pre-written so-called gags in PMQs as well. Speaking of PMQs, one of the benefits of joining us on a membership is we're going to be doing regular streams, live streaming of PMQs with commentary. We're also adding a new feature there next time where we're going to count the number of times Rishi Sunak says stop the boats, if people would like to place their bets, as it were, or make their predictions at the start of the stream. We're going to see who comes through with that. Obviously, it's not a real bet. We're not running a gambling operation here, nor do I have the capacity to give out prizes. But just one way of getting us through the dross that normally is PMQ. So you're very welcome to join us for that on Wednesdays as well. Before we move on to Steve Bannon's recent endorsement of Keir Starmer, just want to quickly do a bit of shilling while I'm on the subject of memberships. Please do hit the subscribe, thumbs up and notification buttons to keep abreast of all of our upcoming and new content as we go along. Make sure that you are subscribed if you'd like to add a comment in the chat. Just 60 seconds later, you'll be able to join others and add your comments there as well. If you'd like to provide a one-off donation, you can go to our Buy Me a Coffee page there. For just the price of a coffee, you can massively help to contribute towards the channel. Thanks again to Wolfpet for your gift earlier. That's much appreciated. Thanks and a massive shout out to you as well. So please do consider joining the channel on one of our membership packages starting from just 99p. There's a whole range of perks, including static emojis. In fact, I'll post a couple in the chat right now just so you can see a couple of examples of the type of thing you'll have access to there. So I've got one of Lindsay Hoyle, Speaker of the House, one of Keith, and then one of the international war criminal Tony Blair taking a selfie on his phone. So there's just a few examples. Also membership badges as well. We've got some great examples of socialists if you'd like to consider joining the channel. We've got Jeremy Corbyn on the great Tony Benn, and of course Keir Hardie, the proper Keir, the founder of the Labour Party himself, and a lot more perks as well as exclusive content and early viewings from just 99p, and the price of a coffee on our standard membership as well. Thanks a lot for your continued support. So, far-right American Republican Steve Bannon. This speaks volumes, what he's had to say about Keir Starmer. Let's take a look at this recent interview.
The next election, very likely to lose. What's the Trump campaign view of Keir Starmer and the Labour leadership now?
I've always been very impressed with Sir Keir. I'm not a Labour guy by a long shot, but I've always been very impressed with him.
Does that not just sum it up? Sorry, again, I thought that... Let me just go again. I thought that clip was a bit longer. It might have uploaded incorrectly. Just bear with me.
The next election, very likely to lose. What's the Trump campaign view of Keir Starmer and the Labour leadership now?
I've always been very impressed with Sir Keir. I'm not a Labour guy by a long shot, but I've always been very impressed with him.
Yeah, sorry, the full clip's not uploaded for some reason. We just got the first sort of 15 seconds there. But that sentence was particularly pertinent there. He's not a Labour guy. He's not a Labour guy, but he's talking about the leader of the Labour Party in the UK, and he's a massive fan of Keir Starmer. Does that not indicate or spell out to us just how far away Keir Starmer is from true Labour values? Of course, it was Tony Blair who moved Clause 4, which stated that Labour was strictly a democratic socialist party. It's now a neoliberal dumpster fire. It's dog shit wrapped in cat shit, if you'll pardon my language. I do let fly a little bit with the language on the live streams. But that really speaks volumes to me, the fact that a far-right Republican such as Steve Bannon, who's obviously way behind people like Donald Trump, is actually a fan of Keir Starmer. We saw a bit of a clip from him earlier when Liz Truss was visiting America. Obviously her appearance there was controversial, but during that speech he referred to Stephen Yaxley Lennon, aka Tommy Robinson, as a hero, and he also gives props to Keir Starmer. Look at the kind of company that we're talking about here. It's worrying. It's worrying. And I use the word fascism where I see it. I don't just shout fascist at things that I don't agree with politically. You know, I've studied politics, I've studied sociology. I'm very thoughtful in the type of language that I try and use, especially when debating online and such. But if I think something is fascist, I'll call it fascist, and that's clearly what it is. Just because it's the 21st century doesn't mean that it can't creep up if you don't keep tabs on fascism, if you don't constantly call it out where you see it. Unfortunately, it will still try and weave its evil way into society via people like Donald Trump and via people like Steve Bannon. And now he's giving shout-outs to Keir Starmer. They're unbelievable. And again, don't come crying to me if 5 years down the line, after a Labour government, you act as though, not you in terms of our wonderful viewers that we have here, I mean the population in general, if they turn around and act surprised thinking that they were getting something better, from the Labour Party this time around, then yeah, I can't really say I've got a lot of sympathy for them, you know. The NIMBYs, the neoliberals, the Blairites, who are actually just Thatcherites. Let's remind ourselves in that interview clip from a year or so ago when he was asked who his political heroes are, Keir Starmer didn't immediately rush to the likes of Nye Bevin or Tony Benn or Keir Hardie, the founder of the Labour Party himself. Straight away, without a heartbeat, he said that he was always inspired by Margaret Thatcher, as of course Tony Blair did, who's still having a massive amount of influence on the Labour Party, as does Peter Mandelson, unfortunately. And what a rum bunch, what an absolute foul mob we've got on our hands here with Labour. How far things have fallen in the last 5 years, it does make me tremendously sad, to be honest. I do have to say, it's very tragic when you think about all of the trade unions who have fought over the years for their rights, all the other protest marches that have happened throughout the years, decades, and, well, centuries, as it is now. The Labour Party itself is, you know, about 100 years old, and all of that has just been washed away. It's just been thrown under a bus, thrown out of the window, set on fire, whatever analogy you want to use, by the likes of Tony Blair and Keir Starmer. And it's awful, you know. Do we forget our history, our great history of forging rights for people? Back in the day, it was only the wealthy elites that could vote. Women, of course, didn't have the vote. There was the suffragettes movement, of course, over 100 years ago as well. People have fought and people have died for these rights. And it's something that Starmer et al. Are happy to just throw away and do away with, and still expect people to vote for them because it says Labour on the front of the tin. But it's Lino, as was pointed out in the chat earlier. Labour in name only. I'll just try and address a few comments here quickly before I move on to the final clips. And as I said, we had a lot to pack in. Well, this is actually the longest Sunday night live stream that we've done before, but we've had a lot to pack in. Thanks a lot for staying with us as well. One of Florky's asked, where's the special emoji? Should be able to see them there now. I posted one. I posted a couple of googly eye ones of Speaker of the House Lindsay Hoyle and Starmer, as well as selfie taking a blur, as well as Blur taking a selfie in front of Iraq as it burns behind him. I'm sure you've seen that parody picture before, but that's just a few of the examples there. Plus many more. The more members that we get as well, the more static emojis I get to upload. I've done as many as I can so far as well. And Wolfpet as well pointing out, not so much thrown away as sold to the highest bidder. Yeah, the privatisation that we've seen, energy companies, the railways, it's been ridiculous. You remember the phrase from the early 90s, the everything must go. It was started by Thatcher, perpetuated by John Major, and then Tony Blair and Gordon Brown after them. I know a lot of people try and point out that Gordon Brown, they say, is the best Prime Minister that this country's had recently. Let's not forget that he sold off the country's oil reserves for half price, massively undersold, as well as, you know, the continued privatisation of institutions such as Royal Mail, and we've seen it happen, you know, to so many utility companies. I think it's only Scottish Water is the only publicly owned water utility company left, and it just goes on and on and on. And of course, at the end of the day, or at the end of the tax year, where these companies are concerned, and they rake up the profits and, you know, sit and look back at all the money that they've made, do they think, should we pocket this? Or do they think, you know what, we should really reinvest this all back into services to make it better, or perhaps make things cheaper and try and lift some of the burden that's being put upon millions of families at the moment? Do they? Heck, they go running straight to the bank. They go running straight to the bank and consumers are paying hand over fist, and all they're getting in return is worse and worse services as they get stripped away. Don't get me started on the railways, for example. You can probably tell by the accent that we're coming to you live from the north of England, from the northwest of England. More specifically this evening, Northern Rail, having seen some recent statistics, are one of the worst in terms of cancellations and delays. That's why we're so behind the times as well with our infrastructure. The way that the Tories are handling HS2, which in the 21st century is a pretty standard rail system. You look at other countries in Europe, such as Germany, for example. You look at other countries across the world, such as Japan, and the amazing high-speed rail that they've got there, and how the services run very promptly. And they're publicly owned. And that's no coincidence. A friend of mine spends quite a bit of time in Germany. He's a sound engineer for bands, for music acts, and he spends a lot of time on tour with them, spends a lot of time in Germany and other European countries. I was having a conversation with him recently, and he pointed out that even at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the morning, you know, in the wee small hours, you still get a train every 6 or 7 minutes in Berlin or in Munich and other European countries. Someone I know has got to make a long train journey for work next week. I was having a discussion earlier on today. The ticket, the open return ticket for that, costs over £300, going on £350, I believe it was, from where we are in the northwest, travelling to the south of the country for a mandatory work meeting. This isn't a leisure trip. That's the reason why they're having to take the train as well. But you can get from Paris to Rome for €30. So you could travel from Paris to Rome 30 times and still have money left over for the cost of one open return ticket within England itself. Unbelievable. So we're behind the times, not just in terms of scientific and technological innovation, but also where that money goes. And as with so many other things, we're seeing private profit increase year on year. People are making money hand over fist. Just quickly again referring to energy and fossil fuel companies. The owner of BP recently said that BP, British Petroleum, have got more money than they know what to do with. They literally don't know what to do with the money. They've got so much. But when people's quarterly bills are landing on the doormats, people are having to make difficult decisions. But we all know that renewable energy would be 7 to 9 times cheaper. Rishi Sunak doesn't want that. Keir Starmer doesn't want that because it means less money in private hands. If you're saving the public money, that's less private money. It's just, you know, it's like a seesaw. That's the way it balances out. They don't want that because all of their friends are running these companies, or they have other financial interests in it themselves. We need to put a stop to it. Whether it's with the Tories, or with the Labour Party, or the Lib Dems, whatever colour rosette the Tories were, they need getting rid of. We need a brand new system. We need a brand new political system. We need to move out of first past the post into something more along the lines of PR, more representative. People really do need power. I think you're going to be seeing in 2024 as well. A lot of citizens' assemblies are going to be happening. People are going to be demanding a people's house. Do you remember at the Labour Party conference towards the end of last year? Yaz, who's a protester, got up on stage with Starmer and he threw the, it wasn't confetti, it was glitter, wasn't it? Threw the glitter and demanded that people that we have a citizen's house. He was there with an organisation called People Demand Democracy, and you're going to be seeing a lot more of that because we don't have any real representation. About 75% of votes get wasted in a general election under first past the post. And as I've mentioned before, the only other country in Europe that still uses first past the post is Bulgaria. Not that I've got anything against Bulgaria or Bulgarians, it just kind of shows how behind the times we are, that other countries have moved on. Most other countries have some form of PR or alternative voting system in Europe. And we're just way behind. And if you go to these places and actually see it for yourselves, this is what the British press don't report on. Obviously, there are still people on the right wing within the Tory party and other parties who still act as though Britain is the biggest economy in the world and that we still rule the world under our empire through the barrel of a gun like we did for so long. They literally still think that that's the case and that we are major players on the world stage when we're not. We've now dropped to the 6th biggest economy. Ironically, India, obviously having used to be part of the British Empire, the jewel in the crown of the British Empire, now has a bigger economy than us. And that just goes to show how that British Empire ruined countries when it went to it. It didn't make them better. They've actually succeeded more now that they're not part of the British Empire and have gone above us in world rankings of economy. We're now the 6th biggest when we used to be the 5th biggest before we left the European Union. And obviously there's other factors to that with austerity and other Tory policies as well. Yeah. Bit of a rant there, but let me know what you think about those points. People do have the power. We do have that power within us, and whether it comes through citizens' assemblies or other alternative forms of government, it's got to happen. Before we move on to the final clip for the evening, I want to point something out. Whether it's because of economic issues or climate issues or climate change, big things are happening around the world, and it's getting into a bottleneck now. We're coming into the crunch. There is going to be some sort of revolution happening, and it's a choice between whether it's a violent revolution or a peaceful revolution. The peaceful revolution obviously means changing the infrastructure very quickly in a short amount of time. If we're going to make a massive change in society, and if we're going to make a massive change towards carbon output. But if that doesn't happen, society is going to collapse, and we're already seeing the rise of the far right across a lot of the world's major countries, here in the UK and in America, and that's where things will get bloody and things will get violent. We don't want that. The revolution should be velvet, not violent, if you get my meaning. We have to make huge amounts of change in a very small amount of time to avoid the complete breakdown of society. Because remember, a society is only 9 miles away from a revolution. Before people are out there on the streets, you're going to see civil war. You're going to see citizens fighting citizens, whether it's over clean water or a loaf of bread, whatever it may be. This is the reality that we're facing in the coming decades, and something has to be done. Otherwise it is going to get extremely bloody and extremely violent. And the doomsday clock is at the closest point to midnight, of course, since it's been since the Cold War. I believe it's 90 seconds away from midnight at the moment, which is ridiculous. We're facing utter catastrophe. So come together in solidarity, and we can really make that change. As I said, if there's a massive socialist challenge to the existing parties and to the existing system, whether we do that through forming a citizens' house or through protest or through general strikes and this kind of thing, it has to be done, and it has to be done soon. People have got to come together. Otherwise we face a very, very bleak future. And the coming decades, even by the end of this decade, we're going to see the very worst elements of that starting to take effect. And I for one, am genuinely worried, you know. And I'm just doing this live stream to talk to you about how I feel. I'm not asking you for your vote. I'm not standing in the election coming up, you know. I don't have policies to sell you from that regard. I'm just speaking it the way that I think that it is. And from what I understand from fellow sociologists, from professional economists and professional actual professional public political commentators, not the dross broadcasters that we see on the likes of Talk TV or GB News. Which, by the way, just to remind you, Talk TV is going to be coming off and moving to online only because of a drop in ratings. And GB News reported a massive drop in profits recently as well. So let us know what you think about that in the comments. Wolfpet, Belarus, is that one of the countries that still uses first past the post? if it does, then yeah, I stand corrected. I thought it was only Bulgaria that was the other country that used first past the post. I'm more of a UK and US political sociologist, I have to be honest, where it comes to other European countries. For example, my range of knowledge isn't as strong as it is on domestic and US politics, of course, but if it is Belarus, then of course I do stand corrected. Just excuse me one sec, I need to have a little sip of tea. Before I take us on to the final clip, and this is hopefully ending on a more positive note, not a comedy note, but something more positive, which just shows what collective action can do. I've mentioned energy companies, fossil fuel companies, people struggling to pay with the bills quite a bit on tonight's live stream, and this is a recent demonstration and action where a choir who from an organisation calling for the end to the extraction of North Sea oil, i.e. the Rosebank project, which was approved recently, went into Parliament itself, went into the House of Commons, not the chamber, but the sort of lobby of the House of Commons with a choir, and called for an end to projects such as Rosebank, which are continuing to extract fossil fuels from the North Sea, something, of course, which we need to move away from. Not a lot of people realise that this country is sitting on about 10 years' worth of reserves of oil and gas. Did you know that? And they try and blame the prices on the fact that we used to get 4% of our gas from Russia before the Ukraine-Russia war started to escalate there, despite the fact that we're sitting on 10 years' worth of reserves. So we can use those reserves while we transition to renewable energy and save people money on the bills. And of course, organisations such as Just Stop Oil, Extinction Rebellion are well aware that we're still going to have to use at least some oil for agriculture and things like this. This is what's known as residual CDR, carbon dioxide residue, that you still need to keep certain areas and infrastructures going. A lot of people do get confused over the name Just Stop Oil and actually think that the call is for oil to be ceased in its entirety, which is of course a complete falsehood. Admittedly, it's not the best named organisation in the world, but that's not the case. Obviously, all that they're calling for is an end to the new licences such as and projects such as Rosebank, which we're about to see now. So we'll check out this clip before we say our goodbyes in Keith's Fondue Lounge. Sorry about the volume levels at the start of the live stream as well. A few of you did comment that the music was a bit too loud. Yeah, that tune does get a bit annoying after a while. Sorry, I will make sure I've got my eye on the sound levels when we're saying our goodbyes after this clip. But I just think this was a great way to protest, and very well sung as well from this choir who've written this song specifically about Rosebank. It's quite operatic, and in the lobby of the House of Commons the acoustics actually pick up really well. I'm sure that you'll agree when you see this clip. So this is the Stop Rosebank organisation with the choir at the House of Parliament.
Keep moving!
I'm moving.
You are moving. Keep moving.
Yeah.
There's Jobsworth, keep moving there. Oh, you got to keep moving. Got to keep moving now.
Just for the choir.
I'm going to play that again.
I'm moving.
You are moving. Keep moving.
Yeah. Just for the quiet. Can I just...
Keep moving.
Okay, yeah, that brings us towards the end of the live stream. Thanks a lot for being here. I did say we had a lot to pack in. Well, we've been going for 2.5 hours. I did have some other clips of the Rosebank Choir there, but yeah, as I said, we were a bit short for timing, packing everything into the show. It's been fantastic to see you all here on the live stream. Thanks a lot for subscribing, for sharing our content as well. Thanks a lot for the gifts during the chat. We didn't quite get to the membership goal, but never mind, we'll try again next time. Our next scheduled live stream, as I said, will be on Wednesday for PMQs, where we've got the Stop the Boats game with Rishi Sunak. We're going to be totting up the score every time he mentions stopping the boats. I'm sure that will be pretty difficult to keep tabs on, but I'll see how that goes as well. And just one final reminder, if you'd like to consider joining the channel on a membership, they start at just 99p with some fantastic perks, including static emojis, exclusive live streams, and our other standard membership package includes early access to videos as well as exclusive content as well. You've all been fantastic. Thank you so much for being very polite in the chat as well. And yeah, one of Floki's very tuneful in reference to the Rosebank song there. It was indeed. That was great to see. Great form of solidarity and people coming together, calling for an end to new fossil fuels. Thanks a lot for all of your comments and for being so polite in the chat. As I mentioned before, I don't have any moderators at the moment. I am looking to pick up some moderators perhaps in the near future, so thanks a lot for making sure that I don't have to keep my eye on the chat too much or de-escalate any arguments going on. You've all been fantastic and wonderful. We've of course got more content coming up. Whoops. Through the week, of course, we're going to have plenty of content for you to enjoy, so please do check that out as well. Just one final check on Rachel. No, things haven't kicked off there. I think we might have to give up hope at this stage that anyone's going to come and save John Hurt, the poor guy. What are we going to do? So yeah, that's just about it. Thanks again for joining us. We'll be back same time, same place next week with the My Left Eye live stream. We do of course hope to see you on Wednesday for PMQs, and if you've missed out on any of our recent content, do check out that as well. Thanks a lot for your comments. All of the comments on the videos recently have been fantastic. It's been great to get people's opinions, have a bit of debate. I do try and respond to as many comments as I can, and as soon as possible. And whether it comes from a different viewpoint to the one that we have or not, I will try and engage politely, of course, as always. So thanks a lot for that as we say goodbye to Keith there, Peter Mandelson, Margaret Hodge and Lisa Nandy at the back. Hopefully someone soon will call the RSPCA and get the dog rescued from this house, as well as try and get the two other guests you can see at the back there towards a decent party. So we'll be back at Sunday at 7 o'clock next week, as I said. Same time, same place. Until then, take care everybody. My Left Eye will be seeing you soon. Solidarity, people.